Hello, what's up? And I appreciate you guys stopping in for this video, man. So I just finished watching Squid Game, and I wanted to just have a discussion because I've been searching around YouTube, right? Because I have a practice of after I finish a series that I was like really into, or something that really like spoke to me, or something that I was really immersed in and really got a lot out of, I tend to kind of look out what media is available afterwards, just to kind of like to talk about it with other people. You know, I like engaging with like the community that way. And on YouTube, I noticed that there's a lot of like plot summaries and reactions, but not a lot of discussions about some of like the main themes or the main points, or like some like deeper level analysis of Squid Game and what made it so special. And that's what I want this video to be. You know, like, I'm not trying to be pretentious and say like you people just didn't get it. They totally did. There's a reason that the series is as popular as it is, but I just want to have a discussion with you guys about maybe some of the things that got like overlooked, or potentially things that people notice but there just seems to be no discussion around now, and just kind of start the discourse, man, and just talk about what makes Squid Game so special. So if you're coming into this video, I'm gonna assume that you've already seen the series, right? But Squid Game, just to give like the briefest of synopses to people who may not have seen it. Synopses a word? Synopsises? We'll go with synopses. So Squid Game is a death game show, basically, where the characters that are participating in this death game are people that are in the most desperate of financial situations, and they've been presented with an opportunity to win millions and millions and millions of dollars by participating and becoming the last man standing in this game, right? And the participants have to go through a series of events, which are basically, the games are modeled after childhood games in Korea that kids would play, with some pretty serious consequences, right? And like, instead of getting out or getting put in the corner, you die if you lose. So I'd say the consequences are pretty dire, right? And if you haven't watched it, like, before I get into what I want to talk about, please go watch this series, dude. Like, I literally cried at some point watching this show, and it's like, oh my god, it's too good. It's too good. It hit me in a very emotional place. So can't recommend it enough. And then after you get through it, come back and hang out with me, homie, and we'll talk about these themes. So I have my thoughts written out and everything, right? And I have a note page, and forgive me if it's kind of scattered, but like, I was really just trying to go through all of my thoughts, and I want to put them down in paper, because if I don't do that, I lose ideas. So apologies if this isn't like the most organizing sounding thing, but we'll get to a place, I promise. So one of the main points that kind of stuck out with me, right, was how so much of the imagery within Squid Game is representative of like hierarchy, right? Where a lot of the imagery in the series is representative of hierarchy, right? The triangle symbol. The games and the iconography in the series, excuse me, is representative of the triangle, and we know that the triangle represents like the pyramid and the hierarchy, where at the bottom and the foundation, in the case of Squid Game, in the case that we're talking about, right, you have the poor people, right, the proletariat, the proles, and then at the top you have the rich people who are allowed to be elevated to those heights and be in that position that they're in off the backs of the less fortunate who they climb on, you know. And I think from my knowledge base of Korean media, it feels like there's a lot of Korean movies and literature that talks a lot about financial discrepancy and the sort of like tragedies this leads to, and the desperation that it can feed in people. And one major example that comes to mind is the movie Parasite, which is another fantastic film that I think everybody should watch. But it goes into a lot of detail, right, about how those in financially desperate situations are willing to put themselves in extreme situations and do things that they may not otherwise do, because of what poverty leads a person too, you know, like if you're in a desperate situation where you don't know where your next meal is coming from and your environment is completely unsafe and like you're constantly in debt to people and you never know what tomorrow is going to bring, you will do damn near anything to bring yourself out of that situation. And especially if you have other people counting on you, if you have family in the picture. And Squid Game does a great job of like exploring the social and the personal dynamics of like what actions severe poverty can lead people to. And the horse racing at the beginning of the series, I thought was like a really great like tie-in, right, to what we know by the end of the series, that our main character, right, Gi-hoon, is participating in like the horse races and betting money to try to like come somewhat out of the squalor he's in by betting on these horses and making money. And at the end, he's informed by the cop's brother in the limo that he asked the question like, why are you doing this? Like, what's the point of this game and putting us through all this? And the man tells him, you know, you like horse races, right? It's because you guys are horses. Like, you guys are entertainment. And this theme right there, like that statement alone, it really points out one of the most significant themes of Squid Game, right? Which is the rich viewing the poor as a commodity, you know, like they view them as a resource to be used, not as human beings with real life struggles and people that care about them and like in pain and their own goals and wishes. They're literally a means of entertainment and a resource that is completely disposable. And the events throughout the series really showcase this belief set. And one of the other really cool things that is present throughout Squid Game are there's so many Christian themes, you know. And to go back to the quote that I put at the beginning of this video, right? For what shall it profit a man to gain the whole world but lose his own soul? This series absolutely like embodies this quote to a T, right? Where we think about what all those players had to do in order to become finalists in the death game, and by the end of it, right, like Gi-hoon, our main character, he ends up making it out, but he loses everything in the process and becomes a shell of his former self, you know. And all that money that he has, right, that credit card that he got at the end of the game, he literally goes an entire year not even losing it, because he's like, what the hell is the point of money if everybody that I know and loved had to die for me to get it? You know, what's the point of having this sort of cash when there's no one around for me to even spend it on or to enjoy it with? And another piece of just great theming and just framing that the series showcases, right, is that there's this old sort of like analogy that the more fortunate like to tell other people, and they love to tell them to lift yourself up by your bootstraps, right? That if you work hard enough or if you make the right moves, you can improve your situation, and the only reason that you're there is because you're lazy or some such form of that argument, right? But what people don't realize, and what I think Squid Game it does a great job of showcasing, is that some people are so poor that they don't even have bootstraps to lift, you know, like they don't have a starting point from which to springboard to success. Like, I think a lot of us come from an American perspective sometimes, or a Western perspective, where like many of us, like even some of the poorest of people in our country would be rich by the standards of other places, you know. Like sometimes we don't think about internationally and how that applies, but even some people in the States are in complete squalor, you know. And I think that it's just a fundamentally flawed and privileged argument to say that the only reason that somebody is poor is because they didn't want it bad enough. That's a complete load of bull, you know. Like, if you're born in an area that has, where, let's say, like you're born in a country where there's a caste system, right, where you literally do not have the opportunity to climb up the social ladder, and you have no money or no means of, no source of resources or transportation in order to get out of that country, what does that person do? It's not a matter of them being lazy. It's not about them being a terrible person who quote unquote doesn't want it bad enough. Their situation is sincerely difficult, you know. And I'll kind of go into this further. This isn't me wanting people to to have a victim mentality or anything like that, but I really want a lot of us to acknowledge the place of privilege that we're coming from, you know, the reality that, like, as bad as it is for some of us, it'll never be to the level of what some others have to go through. And when it gets to that point of poverty, that's how you end up seeing people desperate enough to go through something like what we see in Squid Game. And I'm not saying literally, you know, but just talking about how that level of poverty can lead to such severe desperation that you will put yourself in harm's way to that extent. And this is just going back to the reality that people will resort to desperate measures to survive, you know? Some people are in such situations that there's no real way, like, they're going to be able to break down some of those barriers, barring a miracle, which is exactly what Squid Game showcases, right? Like, the game for many of these people is a miracle, and I use that in a very loose term because it's hell, but for some people, the only way to get through to the other side is to go through that hellscape, you know? They have no other choice, because life without undergoing that trial, there's no way for it to change for them. So the next thing I want to talk about is how, like, these barriers and stuff, Squid Game does a great job of showing how there are a number of barriers to success that prevent people from being on an equal playing field, right? Like, one thing that Squid Game talks about is equality, you know, like that the runners of the game said that the most sacred rule within the game is for all parties to be equal, because these people did not get an equal chance on the outside. And this goes into things such as institutional barriers that occur that stop people from progressing. Sometimes those barriers can be monetary, you know, where it can be if you're not born with a certain amount of money or a certain level of privilege, you're not even allowed to have these opportunities. It can be things like racial discrimination, like what Ali experienced in his experiences coming from Pakistan over to Korea. It can be misogyny, you know, it can be like the sexism that we saw against some of the female participants. And in Squid Game, I thought that the show did a fantastic job of showing the Squid Game, well, it's not called Squid Game, but just showing the game as a microcosm of the real world, where, like, racism, sexism, and then barriers and strength and just other things like this end up occurring that really impact one's ability to be successful, you know, that in some cases can absolutely stop people from entering into a better spot in life. Squid Game showcases in a very realistic way that there are other barriers to success for some people outside of, oh, this person is just lazy, this person didn't put in enough effort. Like, things like skin color, monetary discrimination, sex-based discrimination, all these things are extremely real and can stop somebody from being potentially successful. So the next thing I want to talk about is Squid Game's showcase of the reality that the main differences between people, once you really get down to, like, brass tacks, right? Once you get down to the nitty-gritty, it's the fact that the differences between us don't really lie so much in either race or sex, but rather the significant differences come between the haves and the have-nots. You know, the special thing that's with Squid Game is that, like, being a woman or a man wasn't the end-all be-all factor that separated you between, like, the staff and the game. The real separation lied in between, do you have money or don't you have money? And this is, to me, on a personal level, I'll get personal for a second, this is why I think things like racism and sexism are so stupid. Like, why are you fighting with people who you have more in common with and defending these rich, like, corporations or people that have zero knowledge of who or what you are and would see you as completely disposable in a heartbeat? Why would you align yourself with that ideology, right? Instead of working together with the people who do know what you're going through and allying yourself with them. And to be specific, man, you feel as though you have more in common with those people on the television than you do the other human being right there in front of you, who is also going through the exact same challenges, trials, and tribulations as you, because you guys are in the same station. That's completely foolish, dude. Like, that makes no sense to me, how you could even reconcile that in your head. Like, the differences between people on the basis of like the financial social hierarchy are way farther gaps than they are between anything like race, sex, and all that other sort of stuff. And I think Squid Game, again, does a great job of showcasing this. Another thing that I think Squid Game does a great job of is exploring like the religious subtext, right? Where, well, I won't say each. I feel like there are characters in the show that represent different like sins to varying degrees, you know? For example, right? We'll go into, let's talk about Sae Beyok, who is one of my favorite characters. She's great, man. She's amazing. But she, to me, represents the sin of pridefulness, you know, and how pride and lack of trust in others can lead to one's demise through refusing to seek help when you need it. And for those that watch the show, right, we know that Sae Beyok's like end came from that fatal wound that she received after like the room exploded or whatever, right? And she attempted to like dress the wound and was bleeding out, but she dealt with this hardship by herself, you know, rather than like talk to staff or go to Gi-hoon about like what was going on with her. She allowed herself to kind of sit there and bleed out, and by the time that anybody discovered what was going on, by the time Gi-hoon discovered what happened, it was already too late and she had lost so much blood, you know. And to me, that situation with Sae Beyok harkens back to Gi-hoon's quote earlier in the show, where he says, you don't ask people for help because they're trustworthy, right? You don't do it because you trust them. You do it because you have nothing else to lean on. And unfortunately, Sae Beyok didn't heed this advice, you know, like she kind of held on to like that pridefulness and refusal to trust all the way to the end, and eventually it was her demise. Some other things that were present in the show, right, where like one thing that I really appreciated was Ali's character, and everybody know he's best boy at this point, right? I haven't met anybody that's watched this show that hates Ali. But one thing that Squid Game did a great job of showcasing, right, is how naivete and innocence will be exploited by others, and how if one is not careful with who they hang around with, or if one places too much trust in somebody too soon, you will be taken advantage of, and you can potentially be destroyed by this, you know? And I thought this was great because not a lot of media really goes into this, you know. I think there's a lot of shows that talk about like the virtues of being trusting and having faith in others, and ultimately that was one of the major themes of Squid Game, which we'll kind of go into in a little bit. But the show, I appreciate through the microcosm of Ali, right? It showed how putting your faith in someone too early on and without appreciating the context in which that trust is being placed can put you in a bad position. You know, he was on the opposite spectrum of someone like Sae Beyok, who if we have complete isolation and lack of trust in Sae Beyok, Ali showcased the issues that come with being too trusting. And I appreciate that Squid Game showcased both of these perspectives. You know, it showed what happens when one is too trusting, when one is not trusting enough, and how both of these can lead to somebody's downfall. Let's see, what other character did I want to talk about, man? Exploring the sin of greed through Sang-woo, right? It explored how being greedy, cutthroat, and exploitative can lead one to have an extremely guilty conscience and ultimately cause one to end their own life. You know, how one can go their whole life like putting others down, and you might reach a certain level of success, but sometimes if you're the sort of person who ultimately still does have a conscience and you realize the things that you're doing are wrong, it can lead to self-destruction and self-termination, you know, and in the darkest sense. And this also goes back to the snake tattoo guy a little bit, right? I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but it's like the main bully character that has a snake tattoo on his face. Squid Game did a great job of showing how those who rule through bullying and fear, Squid Game did a great job of showcasing how those who rule through bullying and fear will be overcome with paranoia and will be betrayed in the end. Gi-hoon did a fantastic job by basically putting in that thug's head, right? That like, okay, so you're the strongest person in here, right? You consider yourself the alpha male, but do you really feel like you can trust those people that are teamed up with you? The only reason they're with you is because of the safety in numbers. But the minute that you turn your back, or it's time for them to be or they're trying to be successful or make their way through the game, do you really think that they're not going to try to take you out as well? And by putting that seed in this guy's head, which is 100% true, by the way, he was able to establish a sense of like paranoia in this guy's mind, making him fearful of those who he was surrounded by, and eventually he was betrayed in the end because of his own actions and people that he chose to put himself around. You know, you can only rule by fear and bullying for so long before somebody decides to try to get sick of it and take you off the throne. You know, nobody wants to live this way. And I think that the Squid Game does a great job of showing it shows that there's a spectrum, right? Where how being too trusting and too naive can put you in danger, but how also being a ruthless dictator and a murderer can put you also into a negative situation where your demise will come as well. You know, it shows how both of these sorts of mindsets do not lead to a successful end. The main points, and we're kind of getting to like the end of my dialogue here, man. I appreciate you guys sticking around with me for my ramblings. But one of the biggest themes, right, of the show is how it's lonely at the top, and that no one reaches the pinnacle of success without some form of support. Every player in that game at one point or another had to rely on somebody else to move further. You know, our main character was saved by Ali at the very beginning of the red light, green light game, and if Ali hadn't gone out of his way to save him, he would have been out in the first round, you know. And there are multiple other examples of like the characters having to use cooperation and teamwork in order to get farther. But the difficulty comes, right, is that if somebody is striving to be number one, then you have to crush everybody you meet along the way. And this, once again, is a microcosm of the real world. You know, when like somebody is trying to pursue a certain level of success, this unfortunately comes often on the backs of others, where you have to lie, manipulate, and potentially betray the trust of those who help you get there, because the pinnacle or the position that you're seeking is one where only one person can be there. And if one person can only occupy that spot, that means that there's going to have to be some sort of conflict in order to take control if other people are vying for that spot as well. You know, and going back to what we talked about, it being lonely at the top. And this begs the question, man, and I think that this is one of the main questions that Squid Game presents to us, is being number one truly that important? And are you really a winner when you win under those sort of circumstances? Is it really worth killing or watching the ones that you love die, watching those that you care about most in the world go away? Or in the Squid Game, we're talking about literal death, right? But in the real world, we're talking about things like ruined relationships, or like people slowly moving away from each other, or like betrayal and manipulation. Is it really worth you destroying everything in your path in order to become quote unquote successful? Is success really worth that? You know, is success worth your loved ones and every bridge you have to burn along the way to get there? And I think that that's fantastic. You know, I think that it's amazing to present like such a large audience with a question like this, because it's a deep one. You know, like we talk especially in Western culture, we have this huge thing with like hustle culture and like constantly grinding and doing whatever it takes to be at the top, because like monetary success is like the only thing that matters. But as this show explores, right, monetary success comes at the sacrifice of others. if you look into the deeper themes, it really starts to present the audience with the question, watch your excess, you know, like living this privileged life with all these amenities and this wastefulness and things that you don't really need. You need to understand that it's coming off the backs of others, and that people out there are having to sacrifice or harm themselves in order for you to have these things, and that's not something that should be taken lightly. And I feel like the portrayal of the Americans at the end of the show, right, who were like the VIPs, I definitely don't think it was a coincidence that those guys were American, and they represented, right, like what happens when one reaches the end of excess. And this is something that's even explicitly stated in the show, right, that when one has too much money, when one has too much power, normal things that would normally satisfy the average person no longer affect you the same way, because you've experienced everything, you know. To give an example, man, like, and I know it's gonna go kind of a weird place, but stay with me because there's a point where like people talk about like internet pornography and pornography addiction, right, and how people state that in the beginning they were able to like get off the pretty like vanilla stuff and all that, right, but as time progressed and as they started seeing more and more things, stuff that used to get a reaction out of them or things that used to like tantalize them before no longer have that same effect, so they have to go to more extremes and more extremes and more extremes in order to be aroused, you know, in order to feel something. And you can see the beginnings of like debauchery, you know. This is where you can see the beginning of the end, man, like the Sodom and Gomorrah type writing on the wall, where if you engage in every single indulgence and every single pleasure that comes into your mind, eventually you're going to reach the point where you're ruled by those pleasures, and it's going to lead to your demise or the demise of others. And Squid Game, like, it both implicitly and explicitly explores these themes, and I sincerely appreciate it for that, man. And finally, we have the theme of hope versus cynicism, you know, where we have Gi-hun, who represents in many ways the belief system that we know the world is fucked, right? We know that the world has some pretty evil stuff going on, but fundamentally you have to be willing to place your trust in others, or else it's impossible to get anything done and we can't function together. And this is juxtaposed by El Nam, right, who the old man who's the mastermind behind the game, whose money and success has basically made him believe that people are fundamentally evil and they'll do anything that it takes to take advantage of others. And hence why this last game that they played, watching that man out on the street at midnight, this is why this game was so significant, because it was basically showcasing the opposing themes of trust versus lack of trust, right? Hope versus cynicism, a belief in the goodness of humanity versus the belief in the inherent evilness of humanity. And in the end, the belief and hope in humanity won out. And I think that this is a beautiful thing, man. This is really, it's hopeful, you know, as dark as Squid Game was in many places, and as like hurtful of feelings as it could bring up in some spots, ultimately I feel like it's an optimistic series, because in the end, belief in humanity and trust and supporting others is what helped bring our heroes to success. Well, our hero, right? But I think I'm done talking. I apologize for putting you through these ramblings, but I would really appreciate some discussion with you guys, man. Let me know what you thought about the series, what sort of some themes and just like main takeaways you got from the story that other people may not be talking about or other people might have missed. And I'll talk to you guys later, man. Appreciate you listening. Be good.